I'm making miniature cheese today for my Tudor doll's house. So thank you so much for tuning in. Let's see how this goes. I have used polymer clay to make a few items in my doll's house, but I haven't used it very often. Some of this polymer clay is from the Doll's House Fair in York, so I bought it second hand, and for some reason this yellow clay, when I started to use it, just crumbled. It's really crumbly. So first of all, I tried to soften the clay. In the past I have mixed the clay with a little bit of Vaseline. This time I just tried to bend it and stretch it until it was soft. I wasn't quite sure what type of cheese to make. Obviously my doll's house is set in the Tudor era, and I wasn't sure what cheese would have been eaten during the Tudor era. I decided to try and make some blue cheese, and I was very much making this up as I went along. As I have said in previous videos, this is definitely not a tutorial. I am not an expert on using polymer clay, and it is just a diary entry to show you what I've been making for my doll's house. Here I was trying to make a marbled effect with the polymer clay. However, I didn't feel like it was going to end up looking like cheese. And I was also finding it very difficult to work with the clay because it wasn't soft enough. So I did some research online and I read a suggestion about using a pasta roller to make the polymer clay softer. So I found one that was second hand online and I bought it. Unfortunately, I couldn't fix it to the table as it was meant to be fixed, just because the depth of my table wasn't quite right for it, but it still worked. It did mean that I needed to hold it down with my hand, so I was very careful not to put my fingers near the rollers. At this point, I think it's really important to say that this pasta roller will never be used with food. It's really important that you do not combine your cooking utensils and tools with polymer clay. Polymer clay is not edible. There are warnings and extra information on the packets of polymer clay which you must always refer to if you are using it. So this roller will never ever be used with food. It's the same with the glass baking tray that I use when I'm baking my polymer clay. The tray is specifically for polymer clay and it never goes anywhere near my food. So when I rolled through the polymer clay, I found that it worked fantastically well and it softened the clay so that it made it a lot easier to work with. Now when I'd started trying to make this miniature polymer clay cheese at the beginning of the video, I didn't think it had gone particularly well. So I looked at some YouTube videos and found a channel called Sugar Charm Shop who made some excellent realistic looking polymer clay cheese. So I watched their video and tried to follow some of the steps. I'd love to hear about your experiences of trying to make miniature cheese. If you've ever given it a go, please do let me know how it went in the comments. Or if you've got any tips, please do let me know. So once I had layered up the polymer clay like this, I then started to cut it into little pieces. I then gathered it all back together and repeated this step several times. At this point, I still felt like the marbled effect was slightly the wrong size, so I decided to roll it up once more and then cut it down again. And then I rolled it into individual little spheres for each mini cheese. I used this piece of plastic just to flatten it down because I wanted to try and avoid getting my fingerprints on the polymer clay. And I repeated this step with the remainder of the clay. I deliberately made the cheeses different sizes. And I also decided to go back to the polymer clay that I had started to use earlier and finish this off too, because I didn't want it to go to waste. I wanted to cut these cheeses into triangles, but I didn't want them to lose their shape with the clay being quite soft now. So I decided to put them into this tub and then pop them into a cold place just to try and make the clay a little less soft before I cut it. Whilst leaving the clay for a little while, I decided to have a look through my little offcuts of wood because I wanted to make some mini serving boards for my cheese to go on. So I tidied this equipment away and I cut out some rectangles from the wood. Now obviously I am about to use my Stanley knife here, please do not copy me, I'm very clumsy, I probably am not using the safest technique because I don't know what the safest technique is. Just like I said before, this isn't a tutorial, it's just a diary entry to show you what I've been making. I made 2 little serving boards because I wanted one to go onto the kitchen table in my doll's house and then a second one to go onto the banqueting hall table. I sanded them down so that their edges were nice and smooth and so that the corners were smooth as well. And I also made a third really tiny little serving board for my miniature mouse that's living in the hidden room in my doll's house. I then decided to paint my little serving boards with some watered down raw umber acrylic paint. Whilst they were drying, I decided to go back to my polymer clay, and now I had actually put a lump of polymer clay into this tub that I hadn't shaped yet. I was hoping that I would be able to sort of break it up into crumbly pieces of polymer clay because I wanted to try and make a crumbly cheese, but this clay was still quite soft. So instead, I decided to try and make it into a cuboid shape and then cut pieces of cheese out of it. But I wasn't too sure about how they were looking. They weren't really looking like cheese to me. So I popped them to one side and I cut these rounds of clay into triangular pieces. I made all different shapes and sizes, and I did the same with each piece of cheese. I went back to this piece of clay and decided to experiment with some different shapes and textures. And I decided that this texture made this look like some softer cheese, maybe like brie. Now, in terms of historical accuracy, I don't know when each cheese was invented. So I don't know if there would have been brie in the Tudor era. It's something that I'd be interested to find out actually, the history of cheese. Maybe something that I could read up on and have a little bit of research on. So I decided to make this cheese into a brie type of cheese. And then it was time to pop them into the oven following the instructions that were on the packet of the polymer clay. I had a little tidy up whilst they were in the oven, and then once they'd finished baking and once they'd cooled down, it was time to see how they were looking. This is the glass tray that I mentioned earlier, so this glass tray is never used for food. I keep this with my clay and I only use it for crafting and modelling. I also never ever put my polymer clay into the oven to bake at the same time whilst food is cooking. As I said, if you're using polymer clay, always read the manufacturer's guidance, the warnings, the information, the instructions to make sure that you're doing everything in the safest way possible. Don't follow my videos as tutorials. So I painted my little cheeses on the outsides using acrylic paint. And depending on what type of cheese it was meant to be, I used slightly different colours. And this is how they looked after being painted. What do you think? Got lots of different types of cheese here. And when they were all dry, it was time to pop them onto their serving boards. I had lots of fun trying to work out which bits of cheese to put where and how to pile them up. And of course, not forgetting the tiny little mini serving board for my little mouse that lives in my doll's house. So one of my serving boards was going to go onto the banqueting hall table and another in the kitchen. And I also decided to make another little serving board for some cheese that I still had to go into my mum's doll's house. I thought it would be a nice surprise for her. I decided not to paint this serving board just because I thought that it would match her doll's house a little bit better, like this. I spent a little bit of time moving things around on the banqueting table to make some room for the cheese. And when I went to put the tiny little serving board into my hidden spot for my mouse, I did actually find that the piece of cheese that I'd chosen was much too big. It was actually bigger than the mouse, as you can see here. So I decided to swap it for a slightly smaller bit of cheese. That's better. And I'm going to end there with some pictures of today's miniature makes. Thank you so much for watching. Please do leave a comment. I love to hear from everybody. And have a really lovely day. And hopefully I'll see you in the next video. Thanks again. Bye bye.